After traveling around Korea for over 12 years, sometimes I think I've seen it all. But it turns out I'm just getting started. I was headed south to the city of Pyeongtaek, about an hour and a half away from Seoul, which I remember looking like this, but now looks like this. Home to two major American military bases, Camp Humphreys, the biggest American base outside the United States, and Osan Air Base, an American Air Force base with roots all the way back to the Korean War. When I first moved to Korea in 2013, I was living just north of Pyeongtaek in the city of Osan. Being too scared to get my hair cut at a Korean barbershop at the time, I sought for the easier path, thinking that it would be more convenient to get my hair cut near the Osan Air Base, as there was a good chance they'd speak English and be more familiar cutting foreigners' hair. So I went to the area of Songtan in northern Pyeongtaek, where the base is located, and by complete accident, I discovered an entire area filled with familiarity. Even as a Canadian, it felt like a home away from home. This was my go-to spot to come to when I felt lonely or homesick. There were always other North Americans everywhere speaking English, which made me feel comfortable, but most of them were living inside the gates of the base, so I almost felt like a spy coming from the mainland of Korea, living a completely different type of life than those around here, despite being so close. There was a gray market Gamestop that sold imported American video games, and best of all, the international food. Specifically Turkish doner kebabs at Star Kebab, a landmark of Songtan, and the best doners I've ever had in Korea, or anywhere for that matter. It was great to revisit an area almost like an old friend, looking the exact same as it did back then, and giving me the same comfort as I remember. However, the purpose of my trip was to see what else was out there, to discover new places while driving down Korea's west coast, and see if I could re-spark my interest to explore the country, as I haven't had a lot of motivation to travel around recently. I was now just on the edge of Camp Humphreys, in a neighborhood called Anjeongni, which has a very similar international shopping street to the one I was just at in Songtan. There's a ton of evidence that the US military is in the area, with certain shops selling older supplies used at the base, and English on the traffic signs, but there's still an older Korean charm to the area. To some, it might look worn down and old, but to me, this atmosphere gives me comfort, as it brings me back to the very first time I stepped foot into Korea, which I've grown so fondly of, and consider myself a full-on immigrant rather than a more temporary expat, the term a lot of Westerners call themselves here. When I embark on a van trip like this, I don't really know what the theme of the trip will be until I'm in the midst of it, and right when I arrived here at Pyeongtaek Hyangyo, a Confucius school built in 1423, I found out quickly that it'd become a trip with good vibes and great people.
안녕하세요.
안녕하세요.
네. 잘생겼다.
감사합니다. 좀 구경해도 돼요, 여기? 네, 감사합니다. There was a volunteer program teaching a group of locals with special needs how to perform a traditional tea ceremony called 다려 from the Joseon Dynasty era. They invited me to film the ceremony and share some laughs together, as we learnt the different ways for men and women to do chol, or bow before the first tea pour, in which men bow down directly on their knees all the way to the ground, with their hands touching both sides of their forehead, and women place their hands on their forehead first, go down on their knees, and bow at about a 45-degree angle. The teacher then showed them how to do a traditional pour of 발효차, or fermented green tea, by holding the lid of the teapot on top to prevent it from falling off during the pour, and then carefully pouring the cup of tea, to show respect to guests before enjoying it together. The teachers were very nice to give me a cup of tea to try as well, which was incredibly smooth. And it's eaten together with yakgwa, or traditional Korean desserts made of wheat flour and honey. I felt so grateful and lucky to be included together in their ceremony, just as a random passerby, and the principal even agreed to give me and another American lady a tour of the rest of the school.
자, 여기가 바로 이제 내산문이라고 그래서 근데 요 올라가는 규칙이 있어요. 자, 오른발부터 딛고
네.
그다음에 왼발 갖다 끌어다 붙이고
네.
한 계단씩 이렇게
아.
이렇게 올라오시는 거예요.
알겠습니다.
네.
And like the other stairs, just right foot,
그렇지.
left, right, one stair at a time.
And white.
왜 그렇게 하는 거예요?
아, 요거는 신성한 공간, 세이크리드 여기에서 이 예의를 표시해요. 우리 전통적으로는 오른발이 더 왼발보다 신분이 높기 때문입니다.
아, 진짜?
아까 우리 여기도 이 기숙사가 이 동쪽에 있는 거하고 서쪽에 있는 건데 동쪽에 있는 것은 더 이제 하이 랭커.
아, 동족이니까.
시니어.
오른쪽이랑 똑같아요.
시니어와 그 하이 랭커 스튜던트 머물렀던 곳이고
네.
후배들. 그렇게 보시면 돼요. 자, 여기도 마찬가지
네.
오른발 먼저
네.
문턱은 밟지 말고 들으시면 돼요.
네.
자, 여기가 이제 우리가 가장 이제 중요한 신성한 이제 공간인 대성전인데 공자님과 나머지 24분의 위패를 모시고 있는 곳이에요. 이거는 여기 이제 위패. 그러니까 이제 돌아가신 분의
예.
성함을 적어 놓은 위패. 우리 조상들은 이 제사 지낼 때 그 영혼이
예.
그 위패에 와서 머무른다고 믿었기 때문에 그렇게 이제 위패를 여기다 모시는 거예요. 공자님, 그런데 컨퓨셔스의
네.
그 이름이 네임이 이제 대성지성 문성왕. 그러니까 뭐냐면 대성은
대성?
크게 이루었다.
예.
지성은 지극한 성인이다.
예.
그 다음에 이제 문선왕은 학문으로 널리 세상 사람들을 이롭게 했다. 그래서 이제 왕의 칭호를 붙여가지고 대성지성 문선왕 이렇게 이제 부른 거예요.
I'm always really thankful when these kinds of experiences happen to me. And I want to extend a massive thank you to Pyeongtaek Hyangyo for giving me such an amazing spontaneous tour. Korea often markets its newer image. Understandable, as it has brought so many visitors here, especially in recent years. But the more I've learnt about the country's history, the more interested I get, and the more connected I feel, as it helps put the pieces together for why certain things are done, such as Chesa, or ancestral rite ceremonies I've seen performed countless times at different holidays here. Influenced by Confucianism, going all the way back at least to the 1st century. But back to my adventure, I was now on the west coast of Korea, in the area of Taeyeon National Park. It's an absolutely beautiful area, especially to watch the sunset at, which myself and many others didn't get so lucky on this day to see. But that's totally okay. I slept in my van here before, but noticed some new signs installed saying Chabak Kumji, or no sleeping in cars. So I continued forth down about 30 minutes to one of Korea's most famous beaches on the west coast that I've never been to, called Daecheon Beach, home to the Tongyeong Mud Festival every year. The drive included some absolutely beautiful bridges and an undersea tunnel for some amazing night views. I got my van ready to sleep in for the first time in a while, watched an episode of the anime Tatami Galaxy, which is incredibly creative and interesting so far, as well as some late night reading to continue my journey of learning how to become as liberated from suffering as possible, mostly through Buddhist influence. I've started to realize something recently, that I almost live two different lives. One of them is the quiet person I show on this channel, traveling around in a van, focusing on my physical and mental health as much as possible. And then the other one goes out on the weekends in Seoul with my friends to enjoy the nightlife, sometimes all night until the subways start running again, which I don't include in these videos as they're from my private life. But I'd like to share a few things here and there, just to create a bigger picture for those who might look at me or others on YouTube videos or Instagram, potentially thinking that there are perfect people out there. When making content like this, it's so easy to only include the best parts that you want others to see, creating almost a perfect image, which I think the viewers might compare themselves to sometimes. So I really don't want to do that. There are no perfect people out there, including myself. We all have flaws and make stupid mistakes sometimes. And I believe if we give ourselves quiet time every day to just think and reflect, becoming more aware of how we can grow to be closer to the person we resonate with inside, we can make a little bit of progress on most days, and potentially be happier overall as a result. So here's to a good day. Whatever you're feeling inside, it's okay to feel. Just don't be too hard on yourself, and care for yourself like a mother cares for her baby. Take a tiny little step forward, and enjoy the ride. I was in the city of Iksan, about halfway down the west coast, a city of over 260,000 in population, about an hour inland from the coast. Iksan was the secondary capital of the Baekje dynasty, spanning from the year 18 BCE to 660 CE, and these days it's filled with a ton of rice, sweet potato, and barley farms. I was headed to one of its most important landmarks that few people who visit Korea ever get to see, called Mideoksa, for my first time. A UNESCO World Heritage Site of the largest and most significant Buddhist temple of the Baekje kingdom that dates all the way back to the 7th century. Founded by Queen Satik, the daughter of a high-ranking Baekje official. Temples typically consisted of one central pagoda, but Mideoksa was so big that it had 3 of them, one for each hall, in which you can see 2 of today. One of them is the oldest stone pagoda in Korea, which was on the verge of collapse in the early 1900s, so concrete was poured to repair it, dismantled in 2001 to chip away the concrete, and then restored and reassembled, which was an extremely complicated process that took almost 20 years until it was finally unveiled to the public in 2019. The pagoda on the east side was already rebuilt in 1993, which is criticized for looking too new, and that's exactly why the process took so long to restore the Western pagoda in a more authentic fashion. It was really interesting to walk around and glamour at one of Korea's oldest structures. And to top it off, there was an absolutely amazing museum with tons of artifacts, including a gold shurira, which was found way later in 2009 during the disassembly, and finally revealed the truth of who founded the temple. Then just a 10-minute drive away, I came across another one of Iksan's biggest historical sites called Gwangju, another UNESCO Heritage Archaeological Site that was once a royal palace and turned into a Buddhist temple during the Baekje kingdom in the 7th century. These days, not a lot remains except for the plot of land with some evidence of advanced engineering, such as a garden with a water management system and the 5-story stone pagoda, built in a unique style that blends Baekje traditions with Shilla Kingdom influences. It was worth walking around though, especially since it's so close to Mideoksa that I explored earlier, and also includes a pretty nice museum to learn more about where it came from. I've driven past these historical sites at least a few times while traveling around Korea, but I've never even considered stopping at them, as there are so many others scattered across the country as well that I end up overlooking a lot. It still blows my mind how rich Korea's history is. Constantly under attack by other empires, conquered multiple times, and here it still stands, with all these reminders where it came from, such as this place called Baekje, the oldest and largest known irrigation reservoir in Korea, built in 330 CE, and birthplace of Korea's rice farming culture. In Korean folklore, there was a white and a black dragon that fought over the reservoir, a metaphor with the black dragon representing the forces of nature trying to destroy the embankment and flood the fields, and the white dragon representing the ancient people who try to protect it. I had pretty much the entire place to myself, which is almost eerie, but a peaceful way to learn more about the Baekje kingdom and wrap up my historical tour for the day. Now heading to Gwangju, the biggest city in Jeollado, with a population of about 1.4 million. Gwangju is another one of those cities I thought I knew a lot about, being the site of the Gwangju Uprising, a democratization movement that started on May 18, 1980, where students at Cheonnam University protested only to be met by military violence, resulting in hundreds and potentially over 1,000 deaths. The protesters are still remembered as heroes to this day. And for me, after doing so much historical sightseeing on this trip, I decided to focus on a new angle of the city this time, seeing where the younger residents go, right next to the Asia Culture Center, a massive world-class arts and cultural complex that's jaw-dropping to look at in person with its grand and modern architecture. Right to the north of it is the neighborhood of Tongyeong, an artsy neighborhood filled with various cafes, restaurants, and entertainment. Since I had something more traditional for lunch, for dinner I decided to try a modern take on the traditional Korean dish, sopap, a dish where rice is cooked in a special vessel to give it a pearly texture, and in this case mine was topped with moksal, or pork neck meat. As I expected, it tasted similar to the sopap you find in every trendy neighborhood in Korea. Still nice and light, but without the cholado charm that I've come to love, like the sundubu jjigae I had earlier. I spent the night walking around, enjoying Gwangju's beautiful night views, discovering a really nice area for the first time just south of Tongyeong at Gwangju Gongwon, with its own historical Confucius school called Gwangju Hyangyo and Higyeongnu, a historical pavilion built in 1454 that was used to celebrate Gwangju's promotion from a hyun, or small town, into a gun, or district, which was called Mujingun at the time. I was off to explore some new areas of Gwangju, specifically the area of Yangnyeomdong, one of the city's most culturally rich neighborhoods. And on the way there, my favorite things to explore: tight sketchy alleyways and free observatories. I talked a bit earlier about how I've almost been living two different lives, and I wouldn't say I'm in a slump now, but I've had another big moment of realization. In Buddhism, they say that the more you learn and seek awareness, the harder it gets. You can start out with the bigger issues, the most obvious ones, which for me was being a chameleon, trying to shapeshift in whichever way I could to gain acceptance from others, at the expense of myself and the people I care about. This was somewhat simple to start with, as the problem was so obvious that I had something to work on every day, feeling weekly, if not daily progress, which I still haven't mastered yet, but I've definitely come a long way. However, I think after identifying and working on the more obvious and simple problems inside, you have to go deeper into your mind to discover the more subtle problems, as they're a lot harder to detect. For me, I almost have to string together 4 to 5 days alone, contemplating to become aware of some of these things, which I don't usually have the time for. But just being aware of this is an important lesson itself, and will help me manage my time moving forward. So here's to more potential progress. And if you relate to this at all, I wish you all the best on your path, and hope you can keep learning and growing, no matter what state of mind you're in. It was a lot of fun to explore a new side of the city I'd been a few times, usually ending up in the same spots. And this is the perfect example of why I believe it's best to try out going to new places just for the sake of it sometimes. I ended up at a neighborhood called Penguin Mall, or Penguin Village, which got its name from the elderly who live here, a lot of whom have knee or joint issues, who almost have a waddling gait similar to how a penguin walks. So the residents collectively called it Penguin Village in a lighthearted manner, celebrating the older generation's resilience to stay within the village as many of the younger residents left. They decorated the neighborhood nicely with tons of recycled waste used in creative ways to make for some interesting exploration, with a lot of things to look at, and a time capsule of sorts, with all the objects from another era. Right beside the village, you can find Ijangu Kauk, a beautifully preserved hanok, or traditional Korean home from the early modern era of Korea, built in 1899, showcasing the architecture of Gwangju's upper-class residents at the time. It was obvious that Yangnyeomdong has a lot of historical and cultural aspects to it, built perfectly for those exploring like I was that day. And on the way to go get lunch, I randomly found a cave sitting there without anyone supervising it, ready for anyone to explore at their own ease, in true Korean fashion. And then something else that seems to happen a lot here. Super kind people taking time out of their day to share some of their passion. Like the boss at this incredible coffee shop called Mugogi Coffee Roasters.
제가 지금 이것은 자석이에요, 자석. 이런 쇠를 고르는 그런 것이 들어가면 이 그라인더가 망가지게 돼 있어요. 그래서 아무것도 아니게 한번 이렇게 돌려주는 것으로 그 다음에 이제 이것을 계속 이렇게 돌려가면서 이런 것들 보이시죠? 썩어 있는 거 이런 거.
네.
그 다음에 이런 콩을 보세요. 파랗게 곰팡이 피어 있잖아요. 예, 이런 것을 골라내는 거예요.
아.
이것은 이제 핸드픽 그런 말을 하잖아요. 이렇게 하는 것이 가장 좋은 방법이다. 이렇게 돌려가면서 좀 이런 것들 지금
다 빼시고. 아, 진짜 오래 걸리시겠네요.
예, 이런 것들 골라내는 거죠. 지금.
아. And just like that, I was finished with my little West Coast van trip, off to the city of Tongyeong, closer to the southeast coast, as I planned to meet my Australian friend Alex there for his birthday while he was on a motorcycle trip around the country. For those that don't know, Tongyeong is called the Naples of Korea due to its similar geographical layout, with a lot of the city being built on steep hills right next to a compact port. It's also the site of the Battle of Hansando that happened in 1592 during the Imjin War, where revered Admiral Isunshin took on the Japanese naval fleet by first sending out a few ships to bait the Japanese, waiting for them to attack, and then surrounding them with a hagikjin, or crane wing formation to secure victory without losing a single ship. A huge shift in momentum during the war that is one of the main reasons Korea is still around to this day. Alex took me to try some mountain luging, which was a blast, and then up the cable car to get views of the surrounding islands. An absolutely spectacular view, and a great way to catch up with a good friend. And that brings me to Busan, where I often end up after a trip to the south just to relax and celebrate, and reflect on all the amazing places I've seen in Korea, with a lot more to go. I just want to say thank you so much for watching my video about my adventures and personal journey. I hope you're all doing great and in good health. Have a wonderful day.